Okay, so let's get into the nature of the problem. And the nature of the problem is if we have misaligned targets and we have misaligned goals, I'm going to have a really hard time trying to hit my sales targets. Now let's take a step back here for a second and think about sales as a whole. So sales is pretty simple, right? If you've been in sales more than 5 minutes, you know it's not as simple as this diagram makes it look, any more than if you've ever gone to an archery range, how difficult it can be to notch an arrow and loose it down range and hit that target. But the truth is it's really not all that complicated when you first start out. Sales is fairly simple. You have an archer, which in this case is our salesperson. We have an arrow, which is our message. And we have a target, which is our customer and the customer base that we want to reach. So when we first start out, if you're an early career company or early career stage growth, it's a really simple process. You've got a compelling value proposition. You need to get customers on the phone in order to tell them about it. Once you go through a compelling demo and the price is good and the return on investment for them, you'll be able to close that deal. And so based on that, you'll start to set up good patterns for yourself, but it gets really complicated as you start to grow. So if you're going to keep a small business and you have a limited number of clients and you have a very unique product, then this presentation is probably not for you. But if you've got a more complex problem or you've got a more complex product and you're trying to learn how do you set those goals effectively, then this is definitely going to work for you. And you're going to resonate on some of these next slides. So what are some of the challenges that can happen? Well, one of the first things that happen is the shifting landscape. What do I mean by that? Well, as you start to grow your team, you don't just have one person who's in charge of revenue. You have sales, marketing, product, operations, and they all have competing goals. The product's life cycle can come to an end. I mean, if you don't believe that, just think about Blockbuster. Blockbuster was one of those companies that was up and coming for many years, and it was everyone else's job to try to emulate what they did. But then everybody moved online in the digital marketplace, and they stayed in bricks and mortar stores. And now I think there's one Blockbuster store left in the entire face of the planet. Everybody else is online. So that shifting landscape can change the way that you need to change your sales pitch. And why are we talking about sales pitches if we're talking about quota? Hold on a minute, because it's going to make a lot more sense. All those different targets start to happen and occur as well. So what are those concurrent targets? Well, again, when I first started in sales, it was pretty easy. You know, I had one target and that goal was to go get new customers. But what happens when I have the client? How do I renew them? I'm still chasing new logos, but what happens when we get new products? Do I upsell the current clients or do I take that product to a new person? What about the customers that we had but we lost? How do I win those back? See, all of those are going to end up going into your sales strategy, and that means they're going to end up going into your targets, and they're going to end up going into what you're trying to accomplish for the year. The next thing that we look at is the changing buyer and the changing criteria. We touched on this a little bit with Blockbuster. I'm not going to go too deep into this today, but it is important to understand that the type of customers that you're going to need to attract is going to determine the type of sales rep that you need to have, which is going to determine the type of compensation plan that you need to have, and that life cycle is going to determine the sales quotas that you can set. So it gets pretty complicated, but right now we're just introducing concepts. And then finally, the complexity that happens is from the selling process. So when you first start out, you have a 3-step sales process: present, demo, and close. But as you go further in your sales product evolution, you're going to end up with a lot of different sales cycles. And you're going to have to go through renewals, upsells. You're going to have to do more with a discovery and pre-discovery. You're going to have to spend more time in demo, multiple decision makers. It'll get more and more complex the longer that we go on. And so it's critically important that as you start to build your sales plan, you also start to stay in touch with your executive team and what they're doing so that you can align your sales goals behind them. Now back to us as sales leaders. What's the challenge? The challenge that we have is when we have multiple targets, all of a sudden the goals change, and those actions that we were doing that made sense and they hit the goal out of the park to begin with, all of a sudden they start to fail. And you see our little target here is our guide. Before we were center massed 5 out of 5, and we're starting to drift out. We're not hitting 5 out of 5 anymore. And pretty soon, if we just double down on our existing repertoire of skills and what we were doing in order to hit our sales goals, we're not going to be hitting it all. And the challenge there is that we're going to end up hitting a stall point. And that means that we've stopped growing. And everybody's busy and everybody's out chasing logos and everybody on the team is executing. But what in the world happened? The devastating consequences of a sales stall have been documented by Harvard Business Review for years. And these are some of the shocking statistics that you need to be aware of if you're a sales leader. 87% of companies are going to hit a sales stalls. But when they did the regression analysis and the after action reports, they found that over 90% of them were caused by internal, not external roles, meaning that something failed internally. Half of those companies didn't live to see another day. And of those that did had a 74% loss in valuation. Try trying to get money in a seed round when you've lost your valuation because you stopped growing. If you're a CEO and you've been in a startup environment, or if you're a mid-market company learning and trying to become a large enterprise, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And the challenge is, because we're in sales, a fifth grader with a calculator can look at a chalkboard and see how we're doing. And we invariably become the target. And when we become the target, we don't have a very long life expectancy. The average VP of sales today in the commercial market has an 18-month average tenure. Why is that? Number one reason, failure to hit our top line sales goals. That can be extremely challenging because we're the people that actually created our goals. So how is it that we're going into planning right now and you're setting your sales goals up and yet you're not going to be in a position to be able to hit them? There's a common misconception that goes into sales planning, and that is that sales results are driven by metrics and process, and that the formula of success, once set, doesn't change. And the great salespeople, well, they can sell any product at any time to anyone. But we in sales, and in commercial sales in particular, know that's not true. Hard-won lessons tell us that sales results aren't driven by metrics and processes, but by aligned metrics and processes. And that as markets evolve, the formula shifts. And as that formula shifts, we can have misaligned rep profiles that cause churn, not only for our customers, but attrition on our teams. And that attrition is one of the hallmarks of things we're going to talk about today. This final slide I put in, and I know it breaks every rule of PowerPoint, but the idea here is to illustrate that sales is simple, but it's not easy. And when you think about target acquisition as something as simple as archery, there's over 18 different things that archer needs to know in order to execute a well-placed shot. And when you look at some of these things, it's the strategy, the enablement, the operations, but simple things like, did we define a target? Or has the shooter demonstrated proficiency in the tools? Or do we even provide training on how to use the bow and arrow? Do we have a system to coach the shooter when they fall behind? Has all the information about the target, the weather, been available to the shooter? And then is a reasonable time allocated for them to be able to hit their objective? See, there's a lot that goes into archery, and there's a lot that goes into selling. And so the next thing that we're going to talk about is effective annual target planning, so we can have one team and one goal.